Hello everyone, welcome back to Bonarescu TV. We are doing another reaction video today on Moldova's election. This is from TLDR News. Let's just get right into the video. We'll see how Moldova's election
voted in the
will
country's
change the
parliamentary
EU.
elections, described by many as a choice between the country's continued path towards European Union membership or to instead seek closer ties with Russia. Opinion polls on the run-up to the vote.
And that's why this, I'm sure they'll talk about this later in the video, but that's why this election for Moldova was huge. This isn't for their president, this is for their parliamentary seats. And a lot of people were thinking it was going to move towards pro-Russia seats or pro-EU seats. So let's see what happens.
Suggested a razor-thin race between pro-European President Maia Sandu's Party of Action and Solidarity and the pro-Russian Patriotic Electoral Bloc. In the end, however, the vote wasn't even close. In a decisive victory for pro-EU forces, the ruling party retained its majority, winning just over 50% of the vote at the time of writing, while the pro-Russian opposition bloc took around 24.3%.
So about half went to the EU side and 25% basically went to the pro-Russian side.
Reaffirming Moldova's path towards the EU in an election that's been described as the most important in Moldova's post-independence history. So in this video, we're going to take a look at Moldova's election and what might happen next.
Good music leading into it, I guess.
Never miss an episode and always feel in the loop by subscribing and ringing the bell.
I'll put their link down in the comments.
Since gaining independence from the Soviet Union in 1991, Moldova had a few left-wing successors to the banned Soviet-era Communist Party. The Party of Communists soon became the dominant force, and in 2001 made history as the first and only communist party in the former USSR to win an outright majority in a democratic election. Despite its name, the party was hardly revolutionary. Its social policies were conservative, and its foreign policy sought to balance ties between Moscow and the West. But that dominance began to crumble after the Twitter revolution of April 2009, when disputed election results sparked widespread protests. By 2014, support for the communists had collapsed, and disillusioned voters turned to the pro-Russian Party of Socialists, which that year won about 20% of the vote, pledging to block NATO, cancel Moldova's EU trade deal, and instead join Russia's Eurasian Economic Union, a kind of post-Soviet version of the EU. But despite the socialist victory, two centre-right pro-EU parties formed a minority government instead. However, this government quickly became plagued by infighting, corruption scandals, and opportunism.
That's also kind of what happens in Moldova a lot of times. It seems like there is a lot of corruption that goes on, and that hurts the people in the end. I think it makes one or two people wealthy, but it hurts the local people of Moldova in the end.
A worsening economic crisis in the country, which led into widespread protests in 2015 into 2016. However, the 2021 elections marked a turning point. Former Education Minister Maia Sandu, co-founder of the PAS, swept to power with 52.8% of the vote, securing a strong parliamentary majority with 63 seats. PAS dominated nearly the entire country, except for three conspicuously pro-Russian regions: Transnistria, Gagauzia.
Okay, Transnistria is definitely pro-Russian. They're the breakaway state of Moldova. Gagauzia is kind of they're kind of different. They speak a different language down there. It's not exactly Russian. They don't really speak Romanian. They speak Gagauzian, which I think is kind of closer to Bulgarian if I remember right. And let's see the last one here.
And Moldova's northern districts.
Okay, the northern districts. I know in belts, they speak a lot of Russian up there. So I'm guessing it's kind of more skewed towards Russian speakers up there.
With the PAS in charge, Sandu launched reforms to align Moldova with EU standards, earning official EU candidate status in 2022. At the same time, she prioritised judicial reform and efforts to dismantle corruption networks, especially those accused of channeling Russian money into Moldovan politics. Now, while these reforms have boosted Sandu's popularity, and she's...
Oh, did you guys see that? It said President Dan Nicușor, so that's just recently. The Romanian president election happened just recently in 2025. And so that video was very recent because the new president was there.
Consistently been rated as Moldova's most trusted political figure, she struggled to address Moldova's various economic challenges. Following Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Moldova, which had previously relied heavily on Russian energy, moved to phase out Russian gas imports, sending energy prices soaring and stoking inflation, which reached a record high of 34.6% in October 2020.
And I think this is hard because Moldova wanted to move away from Russian energy and not be so dependent on it. But when you see 34.6% inflation, that is super hard on the Moldovan people.
Too. And although inflation has eased since then, it rose again at the start of this year, following the expiration of a Ukraine-Russian gas transit deal, which directly impacted Moldova.
I think, so it has 2024 down there twice. I think the last one is meant to be 2025. And that's where you see the 7% inflation.
And remains high at around 7.3%. Meanwhile, over 30% of the population is living below the poverty line, from 24.5% before the war.
And historically, when I lived in Moldova, it was like 2014 or 2015 type time frame, and that was probably like similar numbers there, anywhere in between 24 and 30%. I think that's probably average over the last 25 years.
Economic growth has stalled, with GDP growing by just 0.1% in 2024.
That's not good.
While Sandu has maintained that Moldova's efforts at European integration will eventually bear fruit if voters stick with it, Moldovan society remains deeply divided on whether the country should join the EU. In fact, recently things have looked increasingly shaky for Sandu and her vision for Romania in Europe, with her only narrowly winning both a referendum on EU membership as well as her own re-election as president. And while recent polling shows that a 47.4% plurality of Moldovans now support EU membership, 28% still favour joining Russia's Eurasian Economic Union, with about 18% remaining undecided. Anyway, in the run-up to the vote, Moldova's main
which I know a lot of people have talked about Moldova joining the EU and potentially joining with Romania, becoming part of Romania again. And that would be wild if, 25% of your people aren't for that. You could maybe see a max exodus out of Moldova, right? Like if something like that happens, some people heading to Russia, because they will have both Russian or maybe they only have Moldovan passports. Some people have Romanian and Russian. I'm not 100% sure how the passports will work for them, but
suspended a handful of pro-Russia parties, ruling that they were unconstitutional, while polls showed Sandu's PAS holding a slim lead, capturing around 30% of the vote. Trading in second place was the Patriotic Electoral Bloc, composed of the Communist and Socialist parties, along with two newer pro-Russian groups, the Heart of Moldova Party and the Future of Moldova Party, who campaigned on promises to defend Moldova's sovereignty and resist Western influence. While PAS maintained a roughly
which some people think could be better for Moldova to stay separated from the EU or from Russia and just be their own state. But they are so small and so small economically, it could benefit them to go to either side. I'm not 100% sure. I'm not an economist. I'm not making these decisions, but I'm just saying it could be beneficial to align with one side or the other.
17% lead over the pro-Russian bloc, the race remained uncertain due to a high number of undecided voters, which has steadily grown over the past few years, even roughly matching the PAS's share. Likely driven by economic stagnation, these voters have become highly vulnerable to Russian interference and disinformation campaigns, which have intensified in recent months, and especially in the lead up to the election. On the day of the vote, tensions continue to run high. An electoral monitoring agency reported 250 incidents at polling stations across the country, while hoax bomb threats were reported not only at stations in Moldova, but also in other European capitals, such as Brussels and Rome.
That's interesting because I know a lot of the people who have left Moldova and are still Moldovan citizens but can go out and vote for the presidential elections. I know a lot of them voted for Maya Sandu, so that's really interesting that things were potentially happening outside of Moldova. That's kind of sad in all honesty.
However, at the end of the day, PAS ultimately emerged victorious. With 99.7% of the vote counted, PAS gained 50.14% of the vote, and due to secure 55 of the 101 parliamentary seats, giving the party a comfortable majority. Meanwhile, the pro-Russian Patriotic Bloc came in second, winning 24.2% of the vote and gaining 26 seats. A clear setback for pro-Russian forces, who have already called for protests starting Monday, accusing the PAS of stealing the election. Then the remaining...
I'm sure if it was the other way too, like if the pro-Russian side had won, then PAS would be calling for like a recount or like, hey, what's going on here? You know, so totally understandable.
Seats were split among other smaller parties, many of whom have ties to the pro-Russian parties. With the new centre-left Alternative Bloc winning 8 seats, the populist Our Party securing 6, and Democracy at Home also gaining 6. As I mentioned, for their part, the pro-Russian bloc has promised protests in the capital and claimed that the election was rigged against them. As well as those parties we mentioned earlier, just 2 days before the election, the pro-Russian Heart of Moldova Party, formerly part of the Patriotic Bloc, and Greater Moldova Party were also banned from the election over illegal financing, voter bribery, and undeclared foreign fund allegations.
Wow.
Opposition politicians in the separatist pro-Russian region of Transnistria also accused the government of numerous and blatant attempts to limit the vote of Transnistrian people by moving polling stations outside of Transnistria. Nonetheless,
that's tough because that makes it hard for the people of Transnistria who are probably going to vote pro-Russian. So that's maybe not the most polite thing to do.
The margin of PAS's victory is a pretty decisive win for Moldova's pro-EU ambitions, injecting fresh momentum into a path that had recently begun to look shaky. However, the road to EU membership is still a long way away for Moldova. While Sandu hopes the country will be able to get membership by 2030, Moldova has yet to open up any chapter negotiations and still has a lot to do on combating corruption and cleaning up the country's judiciary. Nevertheless, with PAS retaining its majority, the ability for pro-Russian parties to derail Moldova's European course now looks severely limited. The media landscape right now is moving so fast that it's quite easy to rely on just the information you already know, or the sources you've grown to trust. But what about everything you don't see? Or what if those sources you trust aren't completely honest? Well, luckily our sponsor this week, Ground...
Oh, it seems like the rest of this video will just be about a sponsor. That's how these usually go. So yeah, the big thing here is that Moldova's elections, 50% of the parliament is now like pro-EU, which is really huge going forward for becoming part of the EU and stepping towards those stepping blocks to become part of the EU. But it's also hard because I'm sure the Russian side wants Moldova. Moldova has great vineyards. You know, they have a lot of people in there that support Russia. So we could really see like a split of Moldova coming pretty soon. It's tough to tell, right? But like Transnistria has been a breakaway state for a long time. And so it will be really interesting to see what happens with Moldova over the next couple of years. I love the people of Moldova. I lived there for a little bit, and it is just such an awesome place filled with incredible people. So I hope this doesn't hurt the people, and I hope this makes the people's lives better and can lower that poverty line a little bit. That's the real goal, right? Is to lower that poverty line and try to make people's lives better. But overall, I personally am happy for this. I think Moldova leaning towards the EU right now in the current state of the world is a better affair to be a part of. But you never know. Russia's been a powerhouse for so long, and they have done some good things. They've done some really bad things. But it's so tough to know what is right. But as of right now, the pro-EU side won, PAS won, and they have continued on. And hopefully for the next little while, they will be great for Parliament. So thanks for watching. Go and subscribe if you haven't subscribed yet. And let's just hang out. Thanks for supporting Bolnerescu TV. Thanks, guys.